the part of the world that we're studying this year is called the Eastern Hemisphere. The one continent that we are including in the old world that we don't see pictured on this map is what? Can you pick out the one that's missing, Jackson? Antarctica. Good. How come?
Because it wasn't discovered yet.
That's partly right. But it's more to do with the fact that when I have a flat or two-dimensional representation of the world, it doesn't get spaced out exactly to scale. So a globe is a much better representation of the map of the world. But a globe doesn't help my purposes as much as a flat map with regard to seeing the relationship of country to country, continent to continent, to water, etc. So it's easier for me to read a map than it is the globe, essentially. But because of the shape going from 3D to 2D, I'm going to lose part of what's on the tops and bottoms. Have you ever played with the picture on your television? The picture setting, and it has a zoom, and it has a normal, and it has a wide, and I can't remember what else. Depends on the TV you have. But every time you alter that picture just a little bit, it's going to change your view just a little bit, right? And there might be times when you have it on a certain setting that you lose. If you're watching sports, you lose the ticker tape updates at the bottom of the screen. You know what I'm talking about? You watch TV? Okay. Anyway, that's what happens when we switch views from our three-dimensional globe to our two-dimensional map. So you can see this continent is called, what is this continent? Name it out loud.
Africa.
Africa. Good job.
Asia.
What is this
Asia.
continent?
Europe.
Europe. What is this continent?
Asia.
Asia. We're talking continents. And what is this continent?
Australia.
Australia. All right, the first continent we're going to study this year is Asia. Now look at what all that entails on the green. We're going to look at a map that takes a closer look at just Asia in a moment. All right, before we do, let's take a look at the bodies of water in the Eastern Hemisphere, and then we're going to compare that to the bodies of water on a world map, but it'll be flat, so again, it'll be a little bit misjudged on the scale, but that's okay. It gives us a good representation. So this body of water to the west of Africa and Europe is called the Atlantic Ocean. Good. The body of water on the east of Asia and Australia is called the body of water.
Pacific Ocean.
Pacific Ocean. Good. The smallest, no, not the smallest, the warmest ocean, you'll find it most readily between Africa and Australia, and it comes up to Asia, is called
Indian Ocean.
Indian Ocean. Good. So those are the ones that we are going to see the most. We also will see this fourth ocean a little bit when we study Europe. We'll talk about it a little bit when we study Europe. What is the smallest ocean at the top?
Arctic Ocean.
The Arctic Ocean. Good. All right, we're going to look at that same information on a map. I don't know how to pause that. I don't think I can. Of the world. Let's do it this way. I don't have that other clip. Let me get tacked. They aren't spaced correctly. I remember from using them last year. They're not spaced correctly. So unfortunately, I have to move them around. On this one, I have my representation of pretty much the world, okay? But I can see a comparison. It's like they took the globe and flattened it out to make this map. So I have North America and South America. That's the Western Hemisphere. Those two continents. All the other continents fall in the Eastern Hemisphere. So Europe, Asia, Australia, Africa, and Antarctica.
I didn't even see
Okay.
that till you pointed.
All right, now let's look at the bodies of water in comparison. Probably hold that there. Okay, good. Atlantic Ocean. Now, if you go to the beach in West Virginia, you're going to the Atlantic Ocean. Not that we have it in West Virginia, but usually when people travel to the beach from West Virginia, they're going to go somewhere in the Carolinas, maybe Virginia Beach, maybe Ocean City, Maryland, something like that. You might go down to Florida.
I've been to.
You're still at the Atlantic Ocean, okay? All of those beaches are the Atlantic Ocean. The Atlantic Ocean separates the Americas from Europe and Africa. That is the fact that you'll need to remember about the Atlantic Ocean. It separates the Americas from Europe and Africa. Remember talking about that a little bit yesterday? Or not yesterday? It's been a couple days. I think it was last week. The Pacific Ocean is the largest ocean. Now here's the Pacific Ocean, and here's the Pacific Ocean. It's not that they're two separate oceans, but remember when the globe is one unit, it's like these pages wrap around and make a funnel or a column or a tube, and they're going to be touching each other, right? So that's where they meet back up at that seam. So on this flat map, it looks like I have two Pacific Oceans, but we know on a real representation of the globe or the Earth itself, that's just because it wraps back around and all of that is Pacific Ocean, right? When it wraps back around. So the Pacific Ocean is my western border of North America and South America. So if you go to California, you're at the Pacific Ocean. If you go to Hawaii, you can't even see Hawaii on this map. Let's see. It's going to be over in here. Oh wait, no, it's right here. They do show it right here on this side. Hawaii, look how far Hawaii is from America.
Wow, and it's still a state.
And it's still a state.
And look how tiny.
I think that's amazing. So that's out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Look how tiny it is compared to the vastness of the Pacific Ocean. The Pacific Ocean is the eastern border. Remember, east is on the right side, west is left. So if I have trouble remembering that compass star, that was off. That's better. North's at the top, south's at the bottom, east is on the right, west is left. Do you hear that S in both of those words? West is left. That's about the only way you can remember west and east. West is left. All right, so this eastern border of Asia, Australia, is going to be your Pacific Ocean. In between these three continents is my Indian Ocean. And then the Arctic Ocean is at the top. Those two are kind of easier to remember. Students will mix up the Pacific and Atlantic Oceans before they'll mix up the Indian and Arctic Oceans. So make sure you're confident about the 7 continents. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And the 4 oceans. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay? Make sure you're confident about those. All right. Take those off. And now we're going to look at Asia. If I leave this sticky tack on the board, will you guys remember not to mess with it?
Yeah.
Because we need to leave it here for my maps. Alright. For the future. Alright, here's our map of Asia. Now I want to show you something about this map that you'll see on maps frequently throughout the year. And that's this here. Whenever you have a section of the map that is marked with a boundary and then shown in another area of the map, it's called an inset, and they do that to show it in greater detail. They want to blow that part up. It's like they took a little bit of the picture and made it bigger for you. Okay? So this is called an inset, and what they've done is they've just made it a little bigger, so it's easier for us to see. Notice the part that is the inset on this Asia, map of Asia. Anybody recognize this area? It's found up here on the map.
Yeah.
In the Bible, this area is called the Promised Land.
Promised land.
That's a story. What would the Promised Land be? And what does that mean? Anybody know what the Promised Land is, what that means when we hear that term in the Bible? Sophia?
It's the land that God promised to the people who lived on this world.
Good. It's the land God promised to first Abraham, then his son Isaac, then his son Jacob, and that's when God changed the name of the land from Promised Land to Israel, because he changed Jacob's name to Israel. We're going to actually learn about that entire sequence of events in Bible class, starting in a few weeks. So, just a couple of weeks. So when you look at this part of the map that is taken out and shown larger here, that's the Promised Land. That area, this area right here, is an area that we're going to focus our beginning history on, because that's where the world began, right here. Okay? All right, so there's map of Asia. I'm going to leave that one there because I may have to refer back to it today. And I'm going to show you the beginning of the world. It's nicknamed the Cradle of Civilization. Let's see, turn in your textbook to page 10. Now you'll see a picture of Asia, the continent, right? They have different pictures on theirs because they're trying to show you landmarks, buildings, discoveries, animals, things that are pertinent to those particular areas. Let me see if I can straighten that out a little bit. That is not going straight. I'm going to make it straight. There. Okay. Notice that on page 11, the title of this chapter is The Fertile Crescent, Cradle of Civilization. This is the cradle of civilization. Can anybody tell me what a cradle is? What's a cradle? If you have a baby at home, or if you've had a baby in your house after you were born, you might know what a cradle is. Maybe if you have a baby doll at home, you know what a cradle is. What is it, Emma?
It's like something that you put a baby in.
Yeah, it's a little bed for a baby, isn't it? And it's smaller than a crib. It's where you put the baby in when they're first brought home from the hospital. Yeah, the little bitty baby. So when you first bring a baby home from the hospital, you may not want to put the baby in its crib, although that's a baby bed. But that baby is so tiny that you may want to put it in a cradle, which is a smaller baby bed and often has rocking on the bottom. Good, BJ. It often has the rocking on the bottom so that the baby can be rocked to sleep. And we have that little song, Rock-a-bye baby in the treetops. When the wind blows, the cradle will rock, right? So that cradle is where the little bitty baby would stay. That's where they get this terminology, because the cradle of civilization, this is a secular map of the cradle of civilization, meaning this comes from a public school curriculum. And this, I thought I brought it. I did not. I have one very similar that comes from the church curriculum, the Christian school curriculum that we use that looks very similar to this. We'll start looking at that one tomorrow. It doesn't matter where you go to school, history, human history, begins where people started writing things down. And it's the same whether you're in a Christian school or a public school. Because people started writing history when they were created. They may not be given credit for that creation in a public school setting, but it's the same place. It's the cradle of civilization no matter where you're studying it. Because this is where history began to be written down, because it's where people began living. It's where people started, okay? So when we look at this map, we're looking at different countries, cities, strongholds, civilizations that were present at those times, okay? So I'm going to leave this map up for a little bit while we're talking. Page 11, the land of beginnings. Like all good stories, history has a beginning, middle, and end. That's what you focused on with your writing last year, wasn't it? Having a beginning, a middle, and an end. What we learn about the beginning of history helps us to understand why the middle of history is the way it is and what the end of history will be. Can I tell what the end of history will be? How can I predict what the end of history is going to be? Jackson?
The Bible.
Read the Bible, because God told us that too. To begin history's story, we must go back in time to the creation of man in the Garden of Eden. We talked about that this morning in Bible. We must go to a long, curved strip of land in Asia known for its rich soil and historic past. The combination of its fertile soil and its crescent shape gave the area its name, the Fertile Crescent. Fertile means able to grow crops. Crescent means moon-shaped, not when it's a full moon, but when it's a partial moon, right? Because Earth's earliest people lived in the Fertile Crescent, it is often called the cradle of civilization. There are 2 rivers in this area. You might say, well, I see more than 2. There's 2 main rivers, and they have all these little tributaries, or smaller rivers that flow into them, that have been known from the earliest pages of history. In fact, the Bible talks about them even when he's describing the Garden of Eden. They are the Tigris and the Euphrates. This one that winds a lot more is the Euphrates, and this one that seems to come straight north to south is the Tigris. You need to memorize the location and names of those 2 rivers. You're gonna see them more than once. You'll see them on quizzes, you'll see them on tests. When I say tests, that's plural. They're gonna continually ask you about that because that's where history began and you're studying the beginning of history this year. These rivers begin high in the mountains of modern Turkey and Armenia. Here's Turkey and Armenia today. So if you hear about those countries today, that's where they are on this map. And where melting snows flow down in streams. The name Tigris means arrow. So here's how you're going to be able to tell the difference between the Tigris and the Euphrates. The Tigris means arrow. So it's more like it's coming straight down. You might say, well, I see some curves in the Tigris. Yes, you do. There are some curves. No river is going to be completely straight. But when you're comparing the two, the Tigris is more straight than the Euphrates. Okay? Tigris means arrow. This river runs a straight course just as an arrow does when it is shot from a bow. Euphrates means that which makes fruitful. This winding river brings much water to the thirsty land around it. Okay, so I want you to highlight the first two sentences under the two rivers. Highlight the first two sentences under the two rivers. It'll say two rivers in the Fertile Crescent and end with and the Euphrates. Anybody having trouble finding what they should highlight there?
Yeah.
Emma?
I have it with the names of it. I don't know where it is.
It's a little much. You want to start here and end here. Okay? Start here and end here. At Euphrates. To Euphrates. Yeah, keep going till you get to here. That period right there. Yeah, end there, so start here at 2 rivers. Good job. Jason, did you get it? You want to start here and end here. Okay? All right. Also, highlight that the name Tigris means arrow. It's the first sentence of the next paragraph, and it's underlined. The very next paragraph, highlight the name Tigris means arrow. And then in that same paragraph, highlight the next underlined sentence. Euphrates means that which makes fruitful. Notice how that is pronounced, Euphrates. Okay? Turn the page. As the rivers flow down the mountains to the south, they pick up rich, fertile soil. When they reach the plains below, the rivers deposit the soil, creating excellent farmland. The part of the Fertile Crescent between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers was called Mesopotamia, which means between the rivers. Doesn't that make sense? The name Mesopotamia means between the rivers. So if I look here on this map, this is Mesopotamia. Between the rivers. Highlight that. Mesopotamia means between the rivers. We're at the top of page 12. You're highlighting the first bold typed word, Mesopotamia, and then skipping down to the next line means between the rivers. The Bible names 4 rivers that came together at the Garden of Eden, which was probably located in Mesopotamia, where Iraq is today. And here's the country of Iraq today. One of the 4 rivers was the Euphrates. Another, the Hiddekel, is believed to be the Tigris. The other 2 rivers, which have never been found, may have disappeared during the flood of Noah's day. How can a river disappear in a flood?
When the water's like went down, it could have went down with the waters of the flood.
Exactly.
Or could it?
We know that Noah's flood changed the entire face of the earth. Canyons were made, mountains were formed, rivers were formed, rivers were lost. So we have all kinds of geographical changes that occurred after the flood. For a long time, the Bible was our only record of what early life in Mesopotamia was like. In recent years, like in the last 100 years, men have found other records of early times there, but none is as accurate as the Bible, which is our only completely accurate record of ancient history. Highlight, the Bible is our only completely accurate record of ancient history at the bottom of that first column. The bottom of the first column. The bold words, the Bible, and then the underlined part. So why is the Fertile Crescent called the cradle of civilization? Why'd they use the term cradle? Emma? Yeah, it's like the babyhood of manhood, of mankind. It's the babyhood of mankind, right here, that place. What two rivers flow through the Fertile Crescent? The two that you have to remember. Jackson?
Euphrates and Tigris.
Perfect. What does the word Tigris mean? Sophia?
An arrow.
Good. It means arrow. What about Euphrates? What does that mean? Sophia Settler?
That which makes fruitful.
Good. BJ, what does Mesopotamia mean?
Between the rivers.
Good. Between the rivers. Where can we find the only completely accurate record of ancient history? Abby? The last thing we highlighted. Where can we find that? Where can we find the only completely accurate record of ancient history? The Bible, yes. That's right. Because God focused on the whole part, and man only really focused on what happened to them, themselves, at that time. They didn't focus on any other parts. So for us to get the whole picture, we have to read God's account, because he took into consideration everybody's doings back then. Okay? All right, so we won't really look at this map anymore. We're going to look at one that looks like this. You have it in your book, but you got to turn it like this. Okay? So you'll see this map about this size starting tomorrow.